Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Gameweek 27 wildcard draft strategy video. And the interesting thing, of course, for this game week is we have finally got the FA Cup fixtures confirmed in terms of progression for the next round of the FA Cup. And that means, of course, we understand now Gameweek 29 and the full landscape of it. The blanks that we will have are 6, and of course we have 4 fixtures with Luton versus Nottingham Forest confirmed and added to the schedule. The other 3 fixtures with the previously 3 confirmed fixtures, I won't talk more about that. We've talked about that plenty. What that does mean, though, is that Luton and Forest players could be more interesting when we talk about short-term strategy. However, on Game 27 wildcard, I think the overarching point for why someone might be looking for a Game 27 wildcard is because they have a lot of issues with their team. Let's say you transferred in Huang last week. Let's say you've been carrying a lot of injuries. Let's say you have someone like Trent in your team still. These are a lot of issues that you need to rectify, and you don't probably have enough transfers or game weeks really to sort of satisfy and see out these issues. So I think it makes sense to go for a Game 27 wildcard if you really have issues with your team in Game 27. If you don't, I think the biggest thing that goes against Game 27 is that you can just go for a Game 28 wildcard, right? You might have, once again, news on Solanke, news on Salah, news on Richarlison or Porro, and things like that. And that can change dramatically what your Game 27 versus Game 28 wildcard draft will do. Now, once again, I think if you're pursuing a Game 27 wildcard, you must have a very weak team for this week, and you are depending on, for example, hopefully getting enough information from the press conferences for us to actually field out a team. So I will also take those assumptions. I'm going to take the assumption that Salah's fit for Nottingham Forest. I will also take the assumption that Solanke's fit for Burnley. I will also take another assumption, which would be that Richarlison's fit for the next fixture. However, if Richarlison's not fit, I think the easiest thing that I can say is that he's interchangeable with Maddison if you have a little bit more money in the bank in FPL. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at this wildcard draft structure and the video later on. Another thing about wildcard 27 is you still have the choice to really change your chip strategy, right? You can go for a free at 29 approach. You can go for a free at 34 approach, and that once again depends on what teams you want to target, which free hit you think is better, and overall going forwards, sort of what team structure you need to satisfy the landscape. On Game Week 29, I think what's interesting is with the Luton versus Nottingham Forest fixture added, it is very dull, right? We can argue that that's a low ceiling blank game week, but at the same time, the issue that a lot of managers face is that they just simply don't have enough players. So you won't be able to collect those appearance points regardless of the amount of players that are from quote-unquote bad teams, like a team like Burnley, a Fulham, or even a West Ham outside of, for example, an asset like Bowen. So that's one thing to think about. Whereas on 3 or 34, you're still unsure and uncertain about the doubles that will fall on 34 and 37, right? It actually depends on, first of all, little things like, for example, Brighton, their progression within their European tournaments, the next round of the FA Cup, for example, whether teams like City, Chelsea, Newcastle, United, whether those teams advance. And so I think it's worth illustrating now what we think the landscape will be for 34 and 37, and just some of the uncertain fixtures that we've been looking at, from an FPL point of view over the last few weeks, and why we think it will fall on certain dates. So what I've taken here is from FPL Team's website, Planet FPL James, who of course, absolutely deserves a follow, does a lot of good work in terms of fixture planning, the sort of assumptions for where the fixtures will fall in 34 and 37. Now, keep in mind that these are not confirmed, right? Some of these fixtures will be confirmed in Game Week 30 when we get a little bit more details about TV scheduling. We'll also get more details with the FA Cup results. So this is the sort of assumed schedule, right? Do not take this for gospel. This is still uncertain, but this is still, I would say, our best guess right now based on the information that we have right now. So Game Week 34, I would expect for that to be a Newcastle double and a United double. You've got the Crystal Palace versus Newcastle fixture, United versus Newcastle at home, United versus Sheffield United at home. We also have the Wolves versus Arsenal game, the Tottenham versus City game, and the Fulham versus Liverpool game, and also the Brighton versus Chelsea game. So those are the fixtures that we think will fall in 34. And then for 37, we think that Brighton versus City, Arsenal versus Chelsea, Wolverhampton versus Bournemouth, Everton versus Liverpool will fall on those fixtures. On top of that, we have another miscellaneous fixture, which is Chelsea versus Tottenham. We don't know where that will fall. It could fall on 34, could fall on 35, could fall on 36, could also fall on 37. We assume that it could actually fall on 36. And that, for example, is something that I'm not going to go into detail about. This is not a chip strategy video. This is just a wildcard chip strategy video. So we'll talk about that. And that's the assumptions that I've taken here to sort of create these drafts. So once again, the two things about the draft that I'll feature today is that one will be a free at 29 draft and one will be a 3 at 34 draft. let's first go on with the 3 at 34 draft. I think this is more relevant for managers who actually have already used their free hit, because if you think about it, you're sort of planning for the short term as well to make sure that you actually have a good enough team for Gaming 29. The first point I'll say is when you look at the amount of players within this draft here, there are not enough players who will field you 11 on Gaming 29, and that's okay, in my opinion. I do not feel that we need to field 11 players for Gaming 29. The reality is you have a couple transfers, Game Weeks 28 and 29, to get players like Bowen on Game Week 28, and to get potentially another player on Game Week 29, whoever actually would actually round out your team quite well, depending on, of course, injury updates and things like that. So the first draft here will actually once again feature triple Arsenal, a very common theme in any wildcard draft. Raya will be here and Kaminsky will pair up with him. Kaminsky is here because, of course, he has a confirmed fixture on Game Week 29. He will also cover Raya's poor fixture, which is the blank versus Brentford in Game Week 28. Gabriel and Saka round out the team just because I think, in my opinion, they're close to locked on any wildcard draft structure, right? These are amazing assets in FPL. I do not think Gabriel's position in the team is lost. So if I was to pick between Gabriel and Saliba, I would just go with the cheaper option. And then moving on, we have Udogi in this draft, we have Senesi, and we have Reguilon and Doughty. So these players are all players who will play on Game Week 29, with exception to Senesi. Senesi, however, I think is still a very good short-term pick to go with this Bournemouth team. You can replace him with Zabarnyi, and that could be something to look at because, of course, Senesi has been subbed off early recently when Bournemouth needed to chase, but he also is the player who actually has better set-piece threat, right? He is the better aerial threat, and we can see that with his expected goal involvement per 90. However, he's also 5 cm shorter than Zabarnyi. Take that for whatever you will. In terms of the midfield, we're going with Saka, Son, Richarlison, who, as I said already, is interchangeable with Maddison, and Palmer. The rogue pick here is going to be Tavernier. Now, in my opinion, first of all, Tavernier can be interchangeable with Barkley. What Barkley will provide you is obviously less value in Game Week 28, but more value in Game Week 29 because he's a playing player in Game Week 29. If you don't like Tavernier and you don't care about double Game Week 28, that's fine. Don't go for Tavernier. Just go for Barkley instead because he's going to give you an additional fixture and you might already be suspicious about Tavernier's minutes, which I think is totally fine. As I said, Richarlison is interchangeable with Maddison, so if he has a knock, just go for Maddison. This draft structure will also have the sort of very template forward line structure, which I think everyone in FPL probably owns or owns 2 out of 3 of, which is going to be Haaland, Watkins, and Solanke. If you think about it, first of all, we have uncertainties on Game Week 27 about Salah. Haaland is the best captain, in my opinion, for Game Week 27. And ultimately, you can just do a hokey cokey from Haaland to Salah on Game Week 30. And then later down the line, you can actually move Son out of your team when, let's say, the fixtures get a little bit worse for Spurs. And you can just move Haaland back into your team around that time in the game. So that is the assumption here for Game Week 29. You go for Haaland here. You go for a 1 premium structure. And of course, the assumption is that this is a draft for people with less money in the bank. If you have upgrades, if you have the opportunity to upgrade anywhere, for example, within your draft, you can go for, of course, maybe something like a Salah draft instead. And you can, for example, forego Haaland. It also depends on the information, right? I think the interesting thing about free at 34 is that you don't necessarily need 2 premiums until what I would say is around Game Week 33. So that's where I plan to go for Haaland and Salah if I was to go for this strategy. Right now, I think the premium that I would go with is going to be Haaland. So this is going to be the first draft structure. The transfers that this team would make on Game Week 28 is as follows. It would just be Haaland to Tony, and on Game Week 29, you can go for Bowen. However, of course, Bowen has a really good fixture on Game Week 28. I think what's inconvenient, of course, in terms of managing, 27, 20, and 29 is that you don't have enough transfers to really go out of your Bournemouth players and back into another player within the field. What you can do, of course, is simply go with Bowen, for example, to start off with, and maybe you can actually sell someone like Richarlison and ignore him for now. Wait for the news on Richarlison too, and just simply have someone like Bowen so that on Game Week 28, you're not stuck with, for example, 3 Spurs players. That's an alternative option as well. But the Haaland versus Tony transfer is going to be locked in this wildcard draft, and that's pretty much it. On Game 29, you have sort of your free choice to sort of go with whatever transfer you want. It could be just simply picking up another player that you fancy, for example, Bowen, let's say if you didn't pick him up already, or that last Spurs midfielder as well. Now, moving on to your free hit 29 draft structure, here we have a chance to actually go with slightly different keepers. We can go with Neto and Petrovic. And of course, Neto's the keeper to go with because you can go with Kaminsky and Petrovic, or you can go Petrovic and Neto. I prefer Neto's fixtures on double Game Week 28, so therefore I would actually rather go with Neto because you don't really care about Game Week 29. As far as the sort of defense, you will go with Gabriel and Saliba. I think it's easier to just pick the outfield players. Saliba for me is still better than Raya, for example. However, he is more costly, so that's one thing to think about. Senesi is the player I would go with, and then Ruben Diaz is the fourth player that I would go with because I think he's still the most nailed Man City defender for the time being. Senesi, of course, we go with because we want to maximize on the sort of 3 Bournemouth players because the fixtures are so good. And then Doughty as your sort of 5th pick here, who once again is the doubler that you can actually change later down the line for someone else who could be a little bit more interesting. In terms of the midfield, we're going here with Salah. And the reason why we're going with Salah is because the assumption is that Salah is going to be fit for Nottingham Forest. Maybe he won't play 90 minutes of football, but maybe if you prefer going with Salah in the short term, it would make more sense. Because, of course, even the Gameweek 30 fixture is going to be a home fixture at Anfield. So that's actually better than, for example, Haaland's fixture on paper, the reverse of that. So we go with Son, Saka, Palmer, Richarlison. Once again, Richarlison interchangeable Maddison. I would probably not necessarily care about which player you go with in this draft. I mean, you could also, once again, go with Bowen or Maddison, and it really comes down to sort of personal preference. Do you think, for example, that Bowen fixture is crucial for Gameweek 28? Do you want to capture that? Do you care about Gameweek 27, Richarlison in the short term, or Maddison in the short term versus Crystal Palace at home? And then in terms of the front line, you'd be going with Solanke, Isaac, and Watkins. Now, the reason why Isaac is here is because Newcastle, we assume to have a double game week on 34. So, of course, having Isaac is going to be a really nice edge against the field. He's back fit now. We also know Wilson's out for a while. The doubt, I suppose, is you're going to put a lot of faith into Isaac, someone who's been quite injury prone. However, he will be the penalty taker for Newcastle. And if there's anything that we can say positively about Newcastle recently is that they still look like a relatively decent attack. Whereas, of course, on the defensive point of view, all things have basically collapsed there. Now, if Salah magically, and unfortunately, of course, is not going to be ready to play good minutes in Gameweek 27, I think you can generally consider a structure sort of move around. You can simply replace Salah with Tavernier and then replace Isaac with Haaland as well. So it really depends on whether you want to get that Haaland captaincy for Gameweek 27, how important or how much information we can get over Salah for Gameweek 27, and that would change my draft structure. The difference here, of course, is that your transfers after this week will not have to be planned towards Gameweek 29. So because you don't care about Gameweek 29, you can suddenly start to go back into, for example, interesting picks at around Gameweek 30, like some of the United players like Garnacho, to sort of build around your team for the Gameweek 34 double that we expect for United to have. You can get, let's say, an additional City player, like get Foden back in your team. You can, of course, also just start with Foden too in that Richarlison position. It just really depends on how much money you actually have in the bank right now in FPL. Personally, I would, for example, prefer going for Son right now over Foden. So that's why I've gone with Son. And Foden, of course, is not the same price as Richarlison. Hence why we have the sort of differences within these draft structures. And that's going to be one other Gameweek 27 draft structure. In my opinion, as I said, the best thing to do is to wait for press conferences to get the best information around things like Solanke, things like Salah. Now, of course, if Salah's not fit, I would just start with a Haaland draft. If Solanke's not fit, what you can do, of course, is consider going for Semenyo, have Semenyo within the team. That replaces, for example, Solanke for a while. So you'll probably be ignoring Solanke completely if, let's say, Solanke actually has a genuine knee issue. But if Solanke's fit for Gameweek 28, I would still hold him in your team and use him as a placeholder in Gameweek 27. So those are my thoughts in terms of like last minute comments on things that could happen based on other information that we can actually receive. And that's it for the wildcard draft structure. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next week.